His bodyguards were ruthless. I think they estimated his wealth at 300 million, not much more than the Queen. He was shot several times. He was a ruthless criminal, and a lot of people got hurt.
John Goldfinger Palmer thought he was untouchable after a jury cleared him of laundering the proceeds of the 1983 Brinks-Mat robbery. A new series of the BBC drama The Gold follows the gangster's fortunes in the wake of his acquittal. On the eve of the 10th anniversary of his unsolved murder, the Daily Mirror spoke to the woman who played a key role in finally bringing about his downfall. Former Mirror crime correspondent Sylvia Jones tells us the remarkable story of her audacious $100 million sting.
My name is Sylvia Jones, and I suppose at one point I was doing your job at the Daily Mirror. I was Fleet Street's first woman crime correspondent in the 80s, which caused a bit of a stir. In the early 90s, I left the Mirror before it moved down here to Canary Wharf, and I moved to the Cook Report for Central Television. It was a highly successful investigative programme, and my main claim to fame is that I'm good at investigations. The most glamorous person involved with money laundering at the time was John Palmer, who had risen in the national psyche after smelting down all the gold from the £20 million Brinks-Mat gold bullion robbery. He'd been at the heart of it, and he was, you know, tall, dark and handsome, glamorous wife, glitzy lifestyle, oodles of money. I mean, you know, he was just the bee's knees. I think the police thought he was untouchable. Fearless though we were at the Cook Report, we decided we'd have a go. So we worked out a sting operation, basically. What we wanted to do was to prove that John Palmer was using his timeshare operation in Tenerife. He'd used the money, this is what is believed, and I think, you know, fairly commonly accepted now, that John Palmer had used all the millions he'd made from the Brinks-Mat bullion robbery and smelting down the gold and laundering it for the people who were involved with the robbery and so on. So he'd used that. He'd invested in a huge timeshare operation in Tenerife. So he was turning dirty money. It was coming out through his companies as clean money.
I see. Okay, and what was the timeshare business?
Holiday makers who'd gone off to Tenerife for a bit of sun and sangria they would be invited, if that's the right word, into basically hard sales pitches. Lots of booze, food, videos, glamorous settings. So, you know, this can all be yours. Buy 2 weeks of the year in Tenerife for X thousand pounds, say £10,000. The Sunday Times rich list, I think they estimated his wealth at 300 million, not much more than the Queen was estimated at the time. I did a lot of work on Palmer and what might appeal to him and what would really drive him into the lens of our camera. His bodyguards were ruthless, absolutely ruthless. So we needed to find a route in, and I thought, with stings like this, you never make the direct route. You always have to have a slightly convoluted way in. You'd never go straight to your target. He was very bright, very streetwise and clever. And I discovered that often foreign people are much better at getting in. In the end, I settled on a retired American detective from Oklahoma who'd done more drug stings than I've ever had hot dinners. But when he got off the plane and, you know, he was balding, bow-legged, with permed white hair, with, you know, what bit he'd got left and so on, I thought, God, what have I done, you know? So we briefed him about how to do it and what we wanted to do, and we asked him to start making calls to Palmer's Spanish solicitor, a man called Solano. And he was known, it was known that he was Palmer's solicitor. So, you know, and Buddy could talk. I mean, he talked non-stop. And I often used to say to him, you know, Buddy, you're talking too much. The aim is to get Palmer on camera and to listen to him talking, not listen to you talking.
But what was Buddy
Burns.
Buddy Burns. What was his story? What was he?
He was posing as an intermediary for a man called Kun Sa, who at that time was the biggest heroin producer in the world. A couple of years before, we had a brilliant fixer who knew Kun Sa, an ex-soldier who'd been into the jungle, into the Burmese jungle, and met Kun Sa and struck up quite a relationship with him. He was writing a book about it, which he did, and we got this man Patrick King, who was just superb, and so we sent Patrick King back into the jungle to persuade Kun Sa to send out two genuine people, two genuine members of his organisation. And he sent his number two, Dr. Sai, and another man, Mr. Boone. And we brought them over to London. There was a very interesting meeting, a lunch at the Ritz. You have to do it big, don't you? You know, you can't just take him down to the cafe at the end of the corner. So Buddy takes, I don't know London. He said, I'll just take you somewhere I've heard of. How about the Ritz for lunch? Palmer thought that was wonderful. Buddy was all wired up. Buddy said, Kun Sa, they produce vast amounts of heroin down there. What we're really after is for you to launder, to deal with $50 million twice a year. Well, you know, you could almost see the pound signs going up in John Palmer's eyes. His fee would have been 25%. We'd put our two Burmese guests we'd hired a rather smart mews house in Marylebone, which we wired up, of course, with cameras and sound and all sorts of things. And the Burmese stayed there, and this is where we had the meetings, because we had all the kit, and downstairs in the garage we had all the receiving equipment and things like this. You know, it was quite an operation. But we could invest so much money, and it was such a sort of a huge operation. We couldn't risk anything going wrong. So I was in at all the meetings with Mr. Palmer, with the two Burmese. My role was basically to be their minder, to look after them, to look after all their needs while they were in London. But my main job was really to make sure that nobody stood in front of the cameras.
If you had been uncovered at any time, if Palmer had found out what was going on, what would have happened? Were you not terrified?
You can't afford to be frightened in situations like that.
And what was he like when you met him face to face as you were undercover?
He didn't really, you know, I was insignificant in his eyes. I was just a woman. I think we had 5 meetings with John Palmer. For the final meeting, he came to the house, and our Burmese men said, "Look, you know, we can't stay much longer in London. We have to get back." But the one thing we'd like to do while we're in London, because we've heard so much about it, is to have tea at the Ritz. Can we take you for tea at the Ritz? This was the first time Palmer had turned up without any bodyguards. He turned up on his own. He was so completely drawn in to this sting that he turned up without anybody at all. So I go out and find a taxi. And we go in a black cab to the Ritz. And because we filmed everything, we filmed absolutely everything or recorded it, but it was a very hot summer's day, really hot. And we were all in light summer clothes. I was in a thin blouse, and where could I hide? Not just a camera, where could I hide a recorder or anything? We had to find something. And the only thing we could come up with was that I would wear stockings and suspenders, and we put the recorder down the stocking top. Right. So I wasn't at the table at the Ritz. I was hovering, you know. I'm just the gopher, you know. I'm just a lackey in all this, you know. So they're sitting at the table, and then in comes Roger, you know, and you know, says, "Mr. Palmer, we hear you're laundering money," and goes into this great, good stuff in the programme, you know, and the Palmer, you know, was quite startled because he's completely suckered. So he gets up from the table and walks out. He doesn't run, he walks out, pushing past everybody, with Roger following, shouting questions and things like that. Palmer gets into a taxi, black cab. There are always black cabs outside the Ritz. So he gets into a taxi, and Roger is half inside the door, following inside the door, putting more questions and so on. Opposite, there were workmen on scaffolding shouting, "Go on, Roger, give it to him, Roger!" The taxi moved away. The lights turned to red. Taxi stops. Palmer is there, with us, with the cameras and Roger and things like this, everybody going, into the road and around and shots from all angles, and the workmen shouting on the other side of the road, and there is Roger opening the door and trying to get more questions of Palmer, and there is an expression on his face when he suddenly realises he has been totally suckered.
Palmer was jailed for 8 years in 2001 for a £20 million timeshare fraud. He was released and then shot dead in his own back garden in Essex on June the 24th, 2015.
A few years later, of course, he's charged with fraud, with timeshare fraud.
So he's charged with fraud, and was that partially because of your evidence? I was asked to give evidence at his trial at the Old Bailey, where by this time he was conducting his own defence, so he was cross-examining me in court. And the last time I'd seen him, bearing in mind, was in just before the Ritz confrontation, when he was virtually interviewing me for a job, and here he was in court, cross-examining me. The police were quite concerned for my safety at the time, and they were giving me protection, getting me in and out of court and things, and looking after me. He was a serious gangster, was a serious player, utterly ruthless in the pursuit of money. And so now we can move forward to June 2015. When he was murdered, he was facing a trial.
He was facing a trial in Spain.
How was he killed?
He was shot several times. I think in the back. The police, some days later, the police found a peephole in the garden, a little piece had been cut out of a wooden fence. And they assumed that somebody had been keeping Palmer under surveillance.
And 10 years on now, no one's been convicted of his murder. Do we have any theories on why he was killed and who might have been behind it?
I think the most likely explanation is that he was shot by a hired assassin, most likely an Estonian gunman currently in prison in Lithuania for, would you believe it, another assassination. I wouldn't wish anybody to be murdered. No. I really wouldn't wish anybody to be murdered. But I do think he was due his comeuppance. But that's not to say he deserved to die. But I mean, he was a ruthless criminal, and a lot of people got hurt, financially, physically. A lot of people committed suicide. Some of the timeshare people who were defrauded committed suicide. They lost everything. I look back on it and I think that was probably television's best ever sting.